Hello, I'm Dr. Breachberg, and welcome to this week's lecture on mythology. Today's subject is going to be mythology of love. Love is a very, very complex topic. Obviously, there's the idea of relationships and of falling in love, but the idea of love from a psychoanalytic standpoint, we get into the concepts of the anima and the animus, two archetypes relating to the soul, the anima being the archetype of the male soul, and the animus being the archetype of the female soul. And people do ask me questions about, well, what happens if you're non-binary or transgender, and I'll get into a little bit of that too in that discussion, because I've given that a lot of thought as well. And so we're going to talk about that nonetheless, how people end up relating to each other, how the masculine and feminine in our own psyches end up connecting with each other. And looking at some of the main stories of the love goddess Aphrodite. So we're going to start with talking about Aphrodite and the different things about her. We are going to look at the myth of Eros and Psyche, or it's sometimes called Amor and Psyche, Eros and Psyche, or Cupid and Psyche. All three are correct. They refer to the same deity, Eros, the god of love. And we're going to look a little bit at Erich Neumann, a Jungian writer, his essay on fear of the feminine. He actually talks a little bit about this, the meaning behind this particular story. Eros and Psyche is a really brilliant story for conveying the process of love. We're going to do some comparative mythology too, because we're going to look at some of the myths from other cultures that are nearby. Egypt, Babylon, Sumeria, and we're also going to go out to the the Nordic and the Celtic and just take a quick look, mainly just to get a brief overview of love goddesses as they appear in their attributes in other cultures. And then the last piece we're going to look at is specifically at the anima and animus, the Jungian theory, how this all works. And so we're gonna take a look at different archetypes of, say, marriage and love, and then we're going to see what Jung would have had to say. And I end it usually with a short video on YouTube. It's about 6 minutes on the idea of the anima and animus. It's from a BBC special on Jung, and it's an extremely they provided extremely helpful analogies to try to understand these two concepts, which are, in some ways, they're very obvious, in other ways they're not obvious. It's the fact that Jung has written so many essays on the anima and never actually says what the anima is tells you quite a bit about, it's one of those, I know it when I see it. But let's get started right away. I'm going to share with you my presentation here, which I'm going to play. Okay, so we're going to look at the archetypes of love and the mythology of love. And by the way, I'm going to say to you right now that the idea of falling in love is the best example of an archetype in action. Okay, we talk about archetypes in the abstracts. We're like, oh yeah, there's these ideas about man, woman, old man, wise person, trickster. We talk about a lot of that, but it doesn't really connect with us until we actually experience it in a very real way. And unfortunately, most archetypes are experienced in psychotic episodes. You might experience the trickster in a run of things that just go wrong, but in which case the trickster is there to maybe be pointing you to something or distracting you from something, or, generally in a roundabout way, trying to make you see something. With love, it becomes a very obvious and straightforward how the projection mechanism works. Although most of the time we are very much unaware of it. So let's start by talking about Aphrodite, who's also known as Venus in the Roman. I should note that Venus does have a slightly different role in Roman mythology, which is pretty typical. Like they are like the Greek gods, but they're not. But we'll save that for another class. Okay, so Aphrodite is the goddess of love, beauty, and marriage, and her associated home is the island of Cyprus. So that is, the people of Cyprus would have festivals. Aphrodite is their patron deity. Okay. And she has a lot of attributes. We talked about many times about how she was born, the foam born, which is what Aphrodite means, and how she is, and this image here from the Botticelli painting where she comes from the ocean riding on a conch shell. And she has all of these, the graces and the hours, also known as the charities and the seasons, who come to attend to her. One of the features that she has, she makes all the gods absolutely bonkers, because when they fall in love, in ways, we know that falling in love sometimes makes us feel like if you're around somebody and you're in love with, you feel like a blithering idiot. Sometimes you're just like, you can't, you don't necessarily behave the same way. I was talking to a therapist yesterday, a bodywork therapist, and we were talking about, body language and inflection and stuff. And what she was saying to me was just, yeah, did you ever know you raise your voice when you're around certain people? It's like, yeah, there's just certain things that we do unconsciously. And then later on, we're like, oh man, why did I do that? Because we always feel like we look like an idiot in front of the person we love, right? Well, Aphrodite is considered to be responsible for this, and her son Eros, as we're going to talk about. One of the things she has is this magic girdle. Okay, yeah, and girdle, it's kind of weird. You wear it around, it's hard to say exactly whether this girdle is worn around the breast, whether it's worn around the waist, whatever it is, this magic girdle, you'll frequently see stories of goddesses who want, other goddesses on Mount Olympus who want to seduce somebody else. And so they'll say, hey, Aphrodite, can I borrow that girdle of yours? A good example of this is Hera in the book of the Iliad that's known as the Ate, the Deception, where she's trying to make Zeus fall asleep so that she can go down and wreak havoc on the Trojans. So she asks to borrow the girdle so she'll be seductive to him, so he'll want to make love to her. And then, of course, she convinces Hypnos, the god of sleep, to put him to sleep. But we'll talk a little about that story. But you see these examples of her magic girdle and the fact that it makes the wearer irresistible. Okay. And the graces and the hours are her attendants. In fact, the name Venus, or Venus in Latin, because there's really no letter V in Latin, it's a U, actually is the word for grace, just so you know. That's what the meaning of that word is. And it's the idea of almost a beautiful divine grace. One that we might associate with love, but we may associate it with other things too. We may associate it, for instance, with divine love, which leads us to this topic of the two Aphrodites. There's the Aphrodite Urania, which has to do with the celestial, the celestial realm is the sky, right? So that's why we have it from Uranus, celestial Aphrodite. In this case, Aphrodite becomes the personification of a sacred spiritual love, the Aphrodite Urania. The more common type of love that we think of is Aphrodite Pandemos, or Aphrodite of all the people. Pan is all, demos is a reference to people in Greek. And so she becomes, in this case, a personification of profane love, like romance, lust, procreation, prostitution, all of these things. The more physical and visceral aspect of love, that's more about having sex and things like that, as opposed to the sort of kind of platonic kind of love that we might talk about. In fact, I think these characterizations were drawn by Plato, Aphrodite Urania and Aphrodite Pandemos. And in the different cities, as I mentioned here, her different aspects are emphasized. So in Athens, as a patron of respectable marriage, probably near the temple of Hera and so forth, Aphrodite is now seen as representing this celestial love. In the port cities where the sailors were coming and going, they preferred the earthier Aphrodite, and that's where you have temples to Aphrodite that do have things like temple prostitutes and those kind of things. Okay, the first story I want to tell you about is, and I mentioned this in the water mythology, water deities lecture, and I couldn't think of the name. I remember I could not think of the name at all. For some reason, I was blanking on Pygmalion. And Pygmalion is actually the original title of the musical / movie My Fair Lady. And the reason they're called Pygmalion is based on this story. So Pygmalion is living on Cyprus, okay? But Pygmalion, he doesn't like loose women. He doesn't like these wanton women who sleep around with everybody. He's got his own ideals about love. So he carves a statue for himself. And the statue is so beautiful that he falls in love with it. I mean, he's behaving in a way, when you read the actual story, he's bringing flowers and singing songs to this statue. And probably if you looked at him from the outside, you'd be like, wow, that man needs help. But he is not, so he continually looks at this woman that he is, that he has created. and he's sad that she's not a real person. Okay. So every year, as I mentioned, on Cyprus, there's an annual festival to Aphrodite. And he makes his offering to Aphrodite, and he asks her, even realizing as unlikely as it is, I created this woman, I'm in love with her, and I would like nothing more. I would, whatever he would offer her, to make her a real woman and not a statue. And Aphrodite's actually, she's amused by this, but she's also quite moved to see this kind of love. So he goes home from the festival, and his statue is no longer on its thing. And instead he sees a live woman sitting there. Now, some stories will name her Galatea. I do not believe she had a name in the original story. I think that was a name given to her later. And they have a child together called Paphos. Now, the reason I think this was used in My Fair Lady is because there's the whole idea of Henry Higgins taking the, the character. She's played by, oh gosh, it was it Audrey Hepburn who played the character? But, she was the rough woman, in the streets, and he molded her into a beautiful woman, into a classy woman, a woman with proper language and proper carrying with proper bearing and so forth. So, the idea that he sculpted this woman from this earthier, woman, in a way, when you think about the concept of it today, it's probably not just a little offensive, but nonetheless, that's why it was originally a play, and it was originally called Pygmalion, based on that. Now, what's interesting about this story to me is that you have this, you have a stone object that becomes living. With Medusa, you have a woman whose look turns a living person into stone. So as I said, this is like a reverse Medusa. This is like, this is a statue coming to life. And why does it come to life? Because the statue is no longer an object, it is a subject. It is something that is real. There's the feelings are real. The love is real. As crazy as Pygmalion seems in this, he's got, his affection for his partner is genuine. In the reverse image, Medusa, and perhaps the story of her arrogance about her beauty and so forth, may actually just play into this conceptually, because, regardless of which version of the story you read, because she is turning herself into an object in a way. Okay, because she is objectifying. And when men look at her, they sort of become objects themselves. It becomes an object-object kind of relationship. It's not a subject-object. And she represents that terrifying element of the feminine that is that men fear, that they are going to lose their vitality. They're going to lose their potency. They're going to lose. So she becomes that. But there's also, the idea of turning someone to stone, the idea of a woman as a statue. You think about a lot of celebrities and fashion models and things that we see that are, that we look at on TV and movies and magazines. Young women look at them and say, oh, that's what I have to look like. They want to imitate that. It becomes like a standard of beauty, but that beauty is objectified. When you see a celebrity, even if you meet that celebrity, okay, you don't really know that person. That person is always just an image. They're just an object. They might meet you. They might be nice to you. They might be a jerk to you, whatever. The bottom line is, even in meeting them, you never really know them. Okay. And it takes time to really get to know someone. And sometimes if you do get to know them, they're not necessarily, don't necessarily live up to your expectations. So it's, but that's whole part of the process. It's the idea of, this total objectification that removes that whole love element. It's completely taken out. It's just completely about the externals. Okay. And in the case of Medusa, like I said, if she's looking at herself in the mirror and thinking she's more beautiful than Athena or than any of the other goddesses, there's a tendency to objectify as well. As women, we tend to do that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying, oh, okay, I'm going to, put on makeup, or I want to look a certain way or whatever. But a lot of times, if we just get caught up too much in how others think about how we look, we tend to objectify ourselves. So it's something to, it's a curious idea, and how this plays out in mythology, the way in which we deal with women as real subjects versus dealing with them as objects. Now let's talk about Eros. Eros is the male counterpart to Aphrodite. In the visions, he's around at the beginning of time, others the son of Ares and Aphrodite. I would sort of argue that the Eros in the beginning, and we talked about creation myths, and we were talking about, Erebus, Tartarus, Gaia, what was the other one? Nyx, and then Eros. That's more of a primal Eros. That's more of a drive to create. There are some stories that make him the same as Aphrodite's son, but Aphrodite doesn't even exist when the original Eros comes into existence. Nonetheless, over time in the Olympian mythology, you see the idea of Eros, or Cupid, as the as the son of Aphrodite, which kind of makes sense. He's kind of like her wingman there, and what he does is he has the bow and arrows, and the idea is that Eros will shoot his arrows of love at whoever is in front of him. And when he does that, generally you'll turn around after you receive that arrow, the first person you see you fall in love with. There's also a very similar god in Hinduism called Kama, Kama. If you ever heard the Kama Sutra, Kama is the idea for lust or desire. One of the famous stories about Kama is that the sages trying to get him to get Shiva, who's deep in meditation, to fall in love with Parvati, who is actually a reincarnation of his first wife who burned herself up, Shakti. Trying to get him to notice Parvati, tries to use Kama with his bow and arrows, but when Shiva catches Kama shooting his arrow, he reduces him to ashes, and the goddess Lalita eventually has to restore him. But he is, he represents desire, and that kind of sexual desire and love. And Eros is very similar, and it's always interesting how it's the idea of the arrow that hits you in the heart. Probably a somewhat metaphorical reference to the way in which one feels when they see someone and they fall in love. You're like struck. It's like somebody, it's like somebody hit you with something. You're very much struck. Okay. So Eros is, he's the companion of Aphrodite. He doesn't always do things the right way. And as we'll see, occasionally he pricks himself with his own arrows. So, he's also considered to be a god of male homosexuality as well. Which is actually quite common in ancient Greece. It wasn't uncommon for, say, teachers and their students, male students, to engage in relations. So, so he was considered to be, the teacher of love in that respect. And of course, Eros is always debated as an ideal of love. Is erotic love love? Is that? The answer is probably that it depends. It is a type of love, certainly. Whether it's the type that's going to lead to a long-term monogamous relationship, not necessarily. But Eros is, but definitely, as an ideal, like what is the ideal state? If we think of loving somebody forever as an ideal state, well, then Eros could not be the ideal. Although people want to live forever with Eros, which I would suggest that's extremely rare, because people, there's all sorts of things that contribute to the feeling of love. And those things can rise up and then they can fall down. And we'll talk about those. Okay, so the story of Cupid and Psyche, and this is how I put it: Eros and Psyche, Cupid and Psyche. Sorry for switching the names around, but you can see it's the name. Or as Eric Neumann would say, Amor and Psyche. This is a very famous story, and this one is one worth reading. So I just want to see. Okay, no, that's the story of Adonis. What I would like is the okay. All right, I'm just looking at what I have in my notes. I actually have the piece about Aphrodite's labor. So I'm going to tell the story outright. The story is in, I think it's Apollonius of Rhodes tells this story in like it's written down in like the early 1st, 2nd century CE. And actually, oh no, I'm sorry. I'm wrong. It's Apuleius, and it's in the book, The Golden Ass. Apuleius is the one who tells the story of Cupid and Psyche. And it is Cupid in that story because this is a Roman retelling. So, so let's talk about the events of the story. So first of all, we have Psyche, a woman who is so beautiful that people neglect the worship of Aphrodite, or Venus in this case. And she is, and if you think about the word psyche means soul, okay? So it refers to that, the living part of the soul. The Greeks actually had multiple names for the soul, which we'll talk about in underworld mythology, but Psyche, or Psyche, is that conscious, that part of your consciousness, that part that makes you a living being, okay? The real spark in you, I suppose, of life. So she is so beautiful that people neglect worship of Venus or Aphrodite. And of course, this doesn't sit well with Venus. So she orders her son to make the girl fall in love with a monster. But instead, while taking his arrows, he pricks himself and he falls in love with Psyche. So, so what he does is they still send a prophecy that when the father goes to the oracle about marrying his daughter, because of course she has many suitors, they say that she has to be sent away to this mountain to be married to a monster. And of course, everybody, including Psyche herself, is very, very upset. But they don't dare defy the oracle because it could mean disaster for her father's kingdom. So, so she goes and she's taken away to this beautiful palace. Okay. And she hears voices around her all the time, but they don't, but she can never see anybody. And at night when she goes to bed, she can't see her husband, but he comes to her at night and he makes love to her. And he's just so sweet and gentle that she's like, this guy's a monster, really? Like she can't, she can't reconcile those two thoughts. She's like, it doesn't seem quite like that. So, so she's there and she's like given everything she wants. So she's got really this idyllic life. And then her sisters, then she complains that she's bored and she's lonely because she's just there all by herself, only surrounded by invisible voices. So she tells Eros she wants her sisters to visit, and he's not happy about this, but he finally relents, okay? Because he thinks the sisters are going to be trouble, and he's right. They come, and when they're very, very concerned, but then when they see the luxury she's living in, they're like, well, and then, but she explains the circumstances, but how sweet her husband seems to be. And they said, no, you are married to a monster. You remember the prophecy, you're married to a monster. And one of these nights he's going to kill you in your sleep. So you need to go and look at him, you need to look at him and then kill him before he kills you. And they get her so upset and so worked up that she says, she goes that night and she gets the lamp and she has the knife. And these are both significant, okay? And she goes, and she tiptoes in and peers at the form of her sleeping husband and realizes her husband's the god of love. And she's so fascinated, she leans in and she drips the candle wax on him. He wakes up, he's betrayed. He says, you betrayed me, and he takes off. And now she is just, she's just devastated because now her love is real. Okay. Before there was just this image, this fantasy. Now it's real, but at the moment of it being real, now the suffering begins. Eros is gone. So she appeals to different goddesses. She appeals to Athena, she appeals to Hera. And while both of them feel really sorry for her, they're like, we'd love to help you, but you really do have to go to Aphrodite. And Aphrodite, by the way, is pissed. She already hates Psyche. Now she's mad at her son for defying her orders, because now she knows, because the son, of course, went back to his mother to, because apparently being hit with candle wax puts him out of commission for like 6 weeks or something. And I don't understand, he's a god. But anyway, apparently a very sensitive god. In any case, he goes away, and Aphrodite now is like, wants to like kick her ass. I mean, she's really, she hates Psyche with a passion. So Psyche, of course, does come to the temple of Aphrodite, and Aphrodite, like, really gives her, you see the some of those reality TV shows where the women start going after each other with the nails and stuff. I mean, it's you can almost picture it being that kind of a thing. Not so much that Psyche is like going to go after Aphrodite, but it's like, get me at that one. I mean, so what Aphrodite does is she tells her that she has to complete certain tasks. Now, what I have in my text here is an accounting of the tasks. So I'm going to read them. Okay. So Aphrodite's first labor, she brings to Psyche some wheat, barley, millet, poppy seed, chickpeas, lentils, and beans. She mingled them in an indiscriminate heap and said to her, "You're such an ugly maidservant. I think the only way you win lovers is by devoted attendance. So I'll see myself how good you are. Separate out this mixed heap of seeds and arrange the different kinds in their proper piles. Finish the work before tonight and show it to me to my satisfaction." Having set before her this enormous pile of seeds, she went off to a wedding dinner. Aphrodite goes to wedding dinners. Psyche did not lay a finger on this confused heap, which was impossible to separate. She was dismayed by this massive task imposed on her and stood in stupefied silence. Then the little country ant, familiar to all of us, got wind of her great problem. It took pity on the great god's consort and cursed the vindictive behavior of her mother-in-law. Then it scurried about, energetically summoning and assembling the whole army of resident ants. Have pity, noble proteges of Terra, or the earth. Our universal mother, have pity, with eager haste lend your aid to this refined girl who is Amor, or Eros's wife. Wave after wave of the Cespedalian tribes swept in. With the utmost enthusiasm, each and all divided out the heap grain by grain, and when they had sorted them all in their different kinds, they swiftly vanished from sight. As night fell, Venus returned from the wedding feast, flushed with wine and perfumed with balsam, her whole body wreathed with glowing roses. When she observed the astonishing care with which the task had been executed, she said, "This is not your work, you foul creature. The hands that accomplished it are not yours, but his whose favor you gained. The little good it's done you or him either." Of course, she doesn't know. The goddess threw her a crust of bread and cleared off to bed. But as soon as Aurora, who's the dawn goddess, a chariot appeared, Venus summoned Psyche and spoke to her like this: "Do you see the little grove over there, flanked by the river which flows by it, its banks extending into the distance and its low-lying bushes abutting the stream? There are sheep in it, wandering and grazing unguarded, and their fleeces with the glory of pure gold. I ordered you to go there at once, and somehow or other bring me back a tuft of wool from the precious fleece." Psyche made her way there without reluctance, but with no intention of carrying out this task. She wanted to seek the cessation of her ills by throwing herself headlong from a cliff along the river. But from that stretch of stream, one of the green reeds which foster sweet music was divinely inspired by the gentle sound of a caressing breeze, and uttered this prophecy: "Psyche, even though you are harrowed by great trials, do not pollute my waters by a most wretched death. You must not approach the fearsome sheep at this hour of the day, when they tend to be fired by the burning heat of the sun and charge about in ferocious rage. With their sharp horns, their rock-hard heads, and sometimes their poisonous bites, they wreak savage destruction on human folk. But on the hours past noon have quelled, once the hours past noon have quelled the sun's heat, and the flocks have quieted down, under the calming influence of the river breeze, you will be able to conceal yourself under that tall plane tree, which sucks in the river water, as I do myself. Then soon as the sheep relax their fury, their disposition grows gentle, you must shake the foliage in the neighboring grove, and you will find golden wool clinging here and there to the curved stems." This was how the reed, endowed with human qualities of openness and kindness, told Psyche in her extremity how to gain safety. She did not disregard this careful instruction and suffer accordingly. She followed every detail, and the theft was easily accomplished. She gathered the soft substance of yellow gold in her dress and brought it back to Venus. But the hazard endured in the second trial won her no favorable acknowledgement from her mistress at the least, for Venus frowned heavily, smiled harshly, and said, "I know quite well that this too is the work of that adulterer." It's kind of interesting. She thinks there's some man doing this for her, who's not her husband, which is, it's interesting if you try to take this and actually apply it to the way women can respond to each other over men, or the way mothers may respond to girlfriends in human relationships. There does seem to be, I mean, obviously not this extreme, but this, first of all, the jealousy that you see from Venus, she has to tell her she's ugly, she's this and she's that, and assuming that she's always like sleeping around, which is kind of funny because that's all Aphrodite does. But in any case, okay, pardon me. Okay. She says, "No, I shall try you out in earnest and see if you are endowed with brave spirit and unique circumspection. Do you see that lofty mountain peak perched above a dizzily high cliff from which the livid waters of a dark spring come tumbling down, and when enclosed in the basin of the neighboring valley, water the marshes of the Styx and feed the horse streams of the Cactus, which are rivers of the underworld? I want you to hurry and bring me back this small jug, some icy water drawn from the stream's highest point where it gushes out from within. Handing Psyche a vessel shaped from crystal, she backed this instruction with still harsher threats. Psyche made for the topmost peak with swift and eager step, for she was determined to at least put an end to her intolerable existence. But the moment she neared the vicinity of the specified mountain range, she became aware of the lethal difficulty posed by her daunting task. A rock of huge size towered above her, hard to negotiate and treacherous because of its rugged surface. From its stony jaws, it belched forth repulsive waters, which issued directly from a vertical cleft. This stream glided downward, and being concealed in the course of the narrow channel it carved out, made its hidden way into a neighboring valley. From the hollow rocks on the right and left, fierce snakes crept out, extending their long necks, eyes unblinkingly watchful and maintaining unceasing vigil. The waters themselves formed an additional defense, for they had the power of speech, and from time to time would cry out, "Clear off, watch what you're doing, what's your game, look out, cut and run, you won't make it." The hopelessness of the situation turned Psyche to stone. Turned to stone, right? She was physically present, but her senses deserted her. She was utterly downcast by the weight of inescapable danger. She could not even summon the ultimate consolation of tears. But the privations of this innocent soul did not escape the steady days of benevolent providentia, or providence. Suddenly, highest Jupiter's royal bird, the eagle, appeared with wings outstretched. This the eagle, the bird of prey who recalled his service of long ago, who followed Eros's guidance. He had borne the Phrygian cupbearer to Jupiter. So Ganymede, the story of Ganymede. She is the one who, this is the same eagle that brought Ganymede to Zeus or Jupiter. The bird now lent timely aid and directed his veneration for Cupid's power to aid his wife in her ordeal. He quitted the shining paths of heaven, flew down before the girl's gaze broke into speech. "You are in all respects an ingenuous soul without experience in such things in this. So how can you hope to be able to steal the merest drop from this most sacred and unfriendly stream, or even apply your hand to it? Rumor, at any rate, has it these Stygian waters are an object of fear even to the gods and to Jupiter himself. Just that you mortals swear by the God's divine power, so those gods frequently swear by the majesty of the Styx. So here, hand me that jug of yours." At once he grabbed it, hastened to fill it with water. Balancing the weight of his drooping wings, he used them as oars right and left to steer a course between the serpent's jaws with their menacing teeth and the triple fork darting of their tongues. He gathered some water in the face of its reluctance and its warning to him to depart before he suffered harm. He falsely claimed Venus had ordered him to collect it, and he was acting in her service, which made it a little easier for him to approach. So Psyche joyously took the filled jug and hastened to return it to Venus. Even so, she was able to conciliate the harsh goddess's resolve. Venus flashed a menacing smile as she addressed her with threats of even more monstrous ill treatment. "Now I indeed regard you as a witch with great and lofty powers, for you have carried out so efficiently commands of mine such as these. But you have to undertake one further task for me, my girl. Take this box," she handed it over, "and make straight for Hades, the funeral dwelling of Orcus, Hades himself. Give the box to Proserpina, Persephone, and say, Venus asks you to send her a small supply of your beauty preparation, enough for one day, because she has been tending her sick son and used all hers up by rubbing it on him. Make your way back with it as early as you can, because I need to doll myself up to attend the deity's theater." Then Psyche came to the full realization this was the end of the road for her. All pretense was at an end. She saw she was being driven to her immediate doom. It could not be otherwise. She was being forced to journey on foot to her own accord to Tartarus and the shades below. She lingered no longer, but made for a very high tower, intending to throw herself headlong from it. She thought this was the direct and most glorious route to the world below. But the tower burst into speech and said, "Poor girl, why do you seek to put an end to yourself by throwing yourself down? What is the point of rash surrender before this, your final hazardous labor? Once your spirit sundered from your body, you will certainly descend to the depths of Tartarus without the possibility of a return journey. Listen to me. Sparta, the famed Achaean city, lies not far from here. On its borders, you must look for Taenarus, which lies hidden in a trackless region. Dis, or Hades, has his breathing vent there, and a signpost points through the open gates to the track which none should tread. Once you have crossed the threshold and committed yourself to that path, the track will lead you directly to Orcus's very palace, Orcus being another name for Pluto or Hades. But you are not to advance through that dark region empty-handed, but carry in both hands barley cakes baked in sweet wine, and have between your lips two twin coins. When you are well advanced on your infernal journey, you will meet a lame ass carrying a load of logs, with the driver likewise lame. He will ask you to hand him some sticks which have slipped from his load, but you must pass in silence without uttering a word. Immediately after that, you will reach the lifeless river, Acheron, over which Charon presides. He peremptorily demands the fare. And when he receives it, he transports travelers on his stitched up craft. So he says, you must allow this squalid elder to take for your fare one of the coins you are to carry, but he must remove it from your mouth with his own hand. Then as you cross the sluggish stream, the old man now dead will float up to you, raising his decaying hands, will beg you to drag him into the boat, but you must not be moved by a sense of pity that's not permitted. When you've crossed the river and advanced further, some aged women weaving at the loom will beg you to lend a hand for a short time, but you're not permitted to touch that either. For all these and all these other distractions are part of the ambush which Venus will set to induce you to release one of the cakes from your hands. Do not imagine the loss of a mere barley cake is a trivial matter, for if you relinquish either of them, the daylight of this world will be denied to you. Posted there is a massive hound with a huge triple-formed head. This is Kerberos. This monstrous, fearsome brute confronts the dead with his thunderous barking, though his menaces are futile since he can do them no harm. He keeps constant guard before the very threshold in the dark hall of Proserpina, protecting that deserted abode of Dis. You must disarm him by offering a cake as his spoils. Then you can easily pass him and gain immediately aspect to Proserpina herself. She will welcome you in genial and kindly fashion, and she will try to induce you to sit on a cushioned seat beside her and enjoy a rich repast. But you must settle on the ground, ask for coarse bread, and eat it. Then you must tell her why you have come. When you have obtained what she gave you, you must make your way back using the remaining cake to neutralize the dog's savagery. Then you must give the greedy mariner the one coin which you have held back. And once again on the river, you retrace your steps to the harmony of heaven's stars. Of all these injunctions, I urge you to do this. Do not seek to open or pry into the box that you carry, nor in any way be inquisitive about the treasure of divine beauty hidden within. Okay, I'm reading this and I'm kind of going on long, so rather than read the rest of it out loud, we have the idea of the labors. So the end of the story is she goes to Persephone. She does all the things she's supposed to do. She gets the box of beauty cream. She's heading back. And she's just thinking, and she can't help but to think that, you know, her own beauty has been tested. So maybe if she just took a little bit out of the box, but of course it's a trick. As soon as she opens the box, she immediately falls unconscious. And at the end of the story, it says, Cupid was now recovering for his wounded healed. He could no longer bear Psyche's long separation, so he glided out of the high-set window for the chamber, which was his prison. His wings were refreshed after their period of rest, so he progressed much more swiftly to reach his Psyche. Carefully wiping the sleep from her, he restored it to its former lodging in the box. Then he roused Psyche with an innocuous prick of his arrow. Poor dear Psyche, he exclaimed, see how as before your curiosity might have been your undoing. But hurry now to complete the task imposed by you by my mother's command. I shall see to the rest. So she takes the gift back to Venus, and so at this point, Cupid is fearing his own mother's wrath, so he goes up to Jupiter and takes his case, who takes Cupid's little cheek between his finger and raises the boy's hands to his lips and kisses it, and then says, honored son, you have never shown me the deference granted by God's decree. You keep piercing this heart of mine. And he talks about that. He says, how you have, yet in spite of all this, he tells him all the things you've done. He's like, yeah, you really screwed me over there, Eros. But he said, in spite of all this, I'll observe my usual moderation, recalling you were reared in these arms of mine. So I will comply with all that you ask, as long as you know how to cope with your rivals in love. And if at this moment there's any girl on earth of outstanding beauty, as long as you can recompense me with her. So they make a decision that Eros and Psyche are going to be, you know, so since he has robbed her of her virginity, he must have her. So Eros and Psyche are then married, and Venus has to reconcile herself to Psyche. And they have a daughter called Voluptua, or voluptuous, which means pleasure. Let's see, am I reading her name right? Yeah. Voluptus, okay. I know my Latin, voluptus. But the word voluptuous comes from that, the idea of pleasure. Okay, so what is our thoughts about this story? Your initial thought about Eros and Psyche. Most of the people who do papers for me on this particular story will say to me, well, yeah, you know, it's because Psyche, you know, it goes back almost to the Adam and Eve idea. It's because she was disobedient. If she wasn't disobedient, none of this bad stuff would have happened. And the question is, really? What would have happened if she hadn't done anything? Just kind of like, what would have happened if they hadn't eaten the fruit in the garden. Okay. How long would this have gone on? How long would she have tolerated it? Okay. So what we're actually looking at here is a kind of feminine hero journey. Okay. Just like in the hero myths, where the hero may live this idyllic life, but then has to come to a crisis. So similarly, this happens with Psyche. The motif she's often compared to is being in the monster in the belly of the whale. When she is when she is in this world with Eros, it's like she's been swallowed by a monster, ironically enough. And the knife symbolizes the way that she cuts herself out, in the way that the heroes in the myths, when they are swallowed by great sea monsters, will cut their way out. I'm going to read this from Erich Neumann's essay called Amor and Psyche. She says, it is not until Psyche experiences Eros as more than the darkly ensnaring one, not until she sees him, he has after all only seen her, that she really encounters him. And at this moment of loss and alienation, she loves him and consciously recognizes Eros. With this, she enacts the matriarchal sacrifice of lover on a higher plane and with the full justification of her claim to human claim to consciousness. By freeing herself from him with dagger and lamp, which she bears in place of the torch of Hecate and other matriarchal goddesses, and so surpassing him in her servitude to him, she deprives Eros of his divine power over her. Psyche and Eros now confront each other as equals. But confrontation implies separateness. The Ouroboros, meaning the snake swallowing its tail, that singular thing, original unity of the embrace in the darkness is transcended. And that's usually like the idea of the womb, you know? And with Psyche's heroic acts, suffering, guilt, and loneliness have come into the world. For Psyche's act is analogous to the deed of the hero who separated the original parents in order to produce the light of consciousness. In this case, it is Psyche and Eros themselves during their sojourn in the paradise of darkness who are the original parents. And it says, yeah, Psyche drives Eros and herself out of the paradise of Ouroboros unconsciousness. Carl Jung will say there is no relationship without consciousness. And if one partner has no consciousness of the other, there's no relationship. If Psyche doesn't do that, she will never actually get to know her husband. Now, I had some other notes here. Let's see. Okay, and to talk about Eros himself, Neumann says, to him, the masculine god, she was desirable enough when she was in the dark, and he possessed her in the dark, when she was a mere companion of his nights, secluded from the world, living only for him, without share in his diurnal existence, in his reality and his divinity. Her servitude was made deeper by his insistence on his divine anonymity. She was still more devoured by him. Okay, so he becomes the devouring force. This childlike girl, the simple and gentle soul, a masculine misunderstanding, if there ever was one, approaches the sleeper with knife and lamp to slay him. Inevitably, her willingness to lose him must burn and wound the masculine Eros painfully. Okay. Yeah, I had one other thing I had wanted to say here from this. Okay. Yeah, and there's I have some notes on the beginning of that. She says, Psyche pricks herself on Eros's arrow and bleeds. So all unwittingly, yet of her own doing, Psyche fell in love with love. The beginning of her love was a marriage of death and dying, being raped and being taken. What Psyche now experiences may be said to be a second defloration, the real active voluntary defloration in which she accomplishes herself. Okay, so this is going on. She's no longer a victim, but an actively loving woman. She is in love, enraptured by Eros, who has seized her with a power from within, no longer as a man from without. For Eros, as a man outside, sleeps and knows nothing of what Psyche does and what goes on within her. And here the narrative begins to disclose a psychological acuteness that has no equal. Psyche's act of love, in which she voluntarily gives herself to love to Eros, is at once a sacrifice and a loss. She does not renounce the matriarchal stage of her womanhood. The paradoxical core of the situation is that in and through her act of love, she raises the matriarchal stage to its authentic being and exalts it to the level of the Amazon. So from the idea of the mother to the warrior. The knowing Psyche, who sees Eros in the full light and has broken the taboo of his invisibility, is no longer naive and infantile in her attitude towards the masculine. She is no longer merely captivating and captivated, but is completely changed in her new womanhood that she loves and indeed must lose her lover. Okay. So interesting, because love, as we know, is never, in spite of Cinderella, is never really about happily ever after. Okay. And it's not that two people can't love each other. It's not that they might not willingly decide to get married, but even in the best relationships, there's always a sense of loss somewhere. And of course, I mentioned here too, the motif of the one forbidden thing. I mentioned it in the Adam and Eve story. You can do anything, but you can't do that. But disobedience is often required in order for the transformation to take place. You know, you cannot do the safe thing. And so there's a really profound lesson here about love and what it means to love. And Psyche herself is actually completely innocent, but she gets dragged about. And you see also some of the way that Aphrodite or Venus mistreats her in this story also makes me think of the way that women tend to judge other women. You know what I mean? You know, whatever's going on in your mind and in your life, it's amazing how other people like to gossip and judge, you know, because here's Venus saying to her, oh yeah, I'll bet it's this other man that you've got, you know, and there's of course it's completely not true, but it's just, I mean, yeah, she does have helpers, but that's not who's helping her. And so there's, it's just, this is an example of a myth that just really does a great job of showing sort of all these dynamics of falling in love and what the real path is to having a real relationship. If you can sort of, you know, deduce it there. Okay, so let's get into our comparative myths. We have, which call it, okay, so I'll make sure that that top isn't there. Yeah, other goddesses of love and marriage. I'm gonna take a look at a few of these. Again, just going to take a brief look because I don't want to spend hours and hours, but we do want to kind of get a brief idea here of these. So the first one we're going to talk about is Cybele. Now, Cybele is supposed to be a mother goddess from Phrygia. She is one of the oldest mother goddesses that is known or has anything written about her in the ancient world. Now, I've said before, and I will say it in my lecture on mother goddesses as well, that these ancient earth mothers, they may have a maternal and protective quality to them, but these are not, you know, these fertility goddesses, these fertility cults are not about, you know, they're not these little peaceful pastoral kind of cults. She's the goddess of caverns and of primitive earth. Okay, her name actually is supposed to mean black stone. And in Islam, if you happen to be Muslim or you know anything about the Muslim faith, it is the word Kaaba. If you go to Mecca, the center sacred city of Islam, there is a big black stone that was part of being part of a temple created by Abraham. But Kaaba comes, you know, the term Kaaba refers to black stone, which really is a reference back to Cybele. It doesn't mean Muslims worship the ancient mother goddess, but it's fascinating that the central sacred object there is something connected with the ancient divine mother. Her priests are called Corybantes, and her rites and rituals to her were frenzied orgies with wild music. We think of Dionysus too, and Dionysus or Bacchus rituals. And it is actually said that Cybele is the one who sort of initiated or taught Dionysus. So the myth of the two of them is that Attis is a young prince. Cybele is in love with him, and she spends a lot of time with him and so forth. But at some point it's decided that he has to be given in marriage to an actual human princess because of his positioning. And Cybele is so outraged by this that she actually ends up killing Attis. Okay, and so she, so she kills him, and then in her grief, she actually takes his blood and turns it into flowers, violets, I believe, become the blood of Attis. But in her rites, her priests, let me read a little of this to you. She's known as Cybele and Magna Mater. That's another name that you'll see for her in ancient Rome. Particularly, there was the Magna Mater cult. The mother of the gods, the worship of this goddess spread through the Roman Empire. Originally Phrygian, she was the goddess of caverns, earth, its primitive state, worshipped on mountaintops. She ruled over wild beasts and was also a goddess of bees. Her festival came first on the Roman calendar, along with her consort, the vegetation god Attis, who, of course, once he's resurrected, he becomes her consort. Cybele was worshipped in wild, emotional, bloody, orgiastic, cathartic ceremonies. The cult of Cybele was directed by eunuch priests. Eunuchs means they've been castrated, called corybantes, who led the faithful in orgiastic rites, accompanied by wild cries and the frenzied music of flutes, drums, and cymbals. Her spring festival celebrated the death and resurrection of her beloved Attis. Okay, and the resurrection comes in the flowers. This is the theme of the dying and resurrecting vegetation god. Okay, and Adonis is another example of that. And later again, yes, the Jesus myth will pick up aspects of that as well. Although Jesus doesn't come back as vegetation, Jesus supposedly, just rises to heaven or however that works. But yeah. So we're talking about wild rites where her priests are castrated and are involved in very wild sexual things because she's the fertility goddess. So Cybele, but very beloved, and her worship was reconstituted in the early Roman Empire. So at the same time, early Christianity is around and all of its multiple variations at that time. You've also got the Mithras cult. You've got the Cybele cult, who comes over really as Magna Mater, and all of these different sort of foreign belief systems in Rome competing for dominance and really actually end up becoming syncretized, in some ways becoming mixed together. But the Cybele cult is something I always point to when people talk about the days of the peaceful matriarchy. I'm like, not necessarily. Okay, Ishtar. Ishtar is in Sumero-Babylonian goddess of love and fertility, and she is the daughter of the god of air, Anu. Ishtar has a rather she's considered to be pretty cruel and merciless. Many of her lovers, she basically destroys all of her lovers after she has sex with them, which is actually supposedly a feature also of any women of Babylonian royalty, like their Babylonian queens, that they would frequently make love to warriors and then kill them. So it was not a kind of an uncommon thing. It's also worth noting that Ishtar is also associated with war. So she's both associated with war and love, and she's not the only goddess who is like that. Frequently, the love goddess was also the war goddess in ancient times. Let's see. Yes. So my notes here says she's described, as the daughter of Anu. Most myths concerning her, she's described as evil, heartless woman who destroyed her mates and lovers. Her greatest lover was the farm god Tammuz, who is similar to the Greek Adonis. So we see Adonis, we see Attis, and we see Tammuz. Okay. After he died, she went into the underworld to retrieve him, but her efforts were vain, and she returned to the living world alone. Later in the Epic of Gilgamesh, she tries to make Gilgamesh her husband, but he refused her and reminds her of her former lovers, whom she mercilessly killed or left injured. She reported this to her father Anu and gave her the mystical bull of heaven to avenge herself. Gilgamesh and his friend Enkidu stopped and killed the mighty creature and threw its headless body at her feet. They also insulted her, and she responded by sending disease to kill Gilgamesh's best friend Enkidu. And she is considered a counterpart to Aphrodite. So she is not, really Aphrodite isn't either. The love goddesses are not necessarily representations of sweetness and light. Astarte is one. She's supposed to be a Phoenician goddess of fertility, and she is the sister and consort of the god Baal. the ancient Canaanite god. And she was actually worshipped by Hebrews, what we think of it now as Jews, prior to the rise of the Yahweh cult, or at least in the early days of the Yahweh cult, because Judaism originally was not monotheistic. They did not worship one God. They did not just worship Yahweh. They were henotheistic, which means Yahweh was their central God and was the most important one, but not the only one. And you do see evidence of this in the Bible, particularly in Psalms, and the reference to Elohim. These, that's the idea that there are multiple gods. Astarte. Here's some notes I have on that. And Astarte, is considered to be basically kind of the counterpart of Ishtar, or and some say she is actually just the Phoenician version of Ishtar. So here's the notes I have. Long before the Yahweh cult emerged among Hebrews in ancient Near East, the goddess Astarte was worshipped by them. Her oldest temple, as Biblios, date back to the Neolithic, and she flourished in the Bronze Age, where she was known as Demeter in Greece and Ishtar in Babylonia. King Solomon worshipped Astarte when the Israelites had not fully committed to a monotheism within the Yahweh cult. And the reference to this is the first book of Kings, chapter 11, line 5. During the Bronze Age, some Israelites perceived her as the female consort to Yahweh. Her symbol was the dove, and coinage portrayed Astarte as the heavenly dove of wisdom, later equated with Sophia, who is the goddess of wisdom in the Bible and mentioned in Proverbs. At the height of her powers, there were many gods and goddesses, one of which was Yahweh, as the psalmist refers to a divine council of these gods which Yahweh addresses. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Selah, give justice to the weak and fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge or understanding. They walk in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I say, you are God, sons of the Most High, all of you, yet you shall die like men and fall like any prince. That's in Psalms 82, okay, where they refer to. And people who translate it try to say council of gods. Well, maybe he meant angels. No, he meant gods. Says Yahweh is upset with his fellow gods and accuses them of not looking after the needs of the weak and destitute. If they don't help, he predicts they will be overthrown. A prediction which unfolds within the key Hebrew scriptures as the gods, including Astarte, are cast off from monotheism under Yahweh. Okay, Astarte will return during Hellenistic Judaism and the apocalyptic and wisdom literature. The Book of Wisdom, Sophia, becomes personified in the 3rd century BCE Judaism as a strong female principle of Yahweh. We learn from Proverbs that she calls to the sons of men crying aloud at the portals of towns. She signals her approval of the Christ by appearing to Jesus as an epiphany in a dove at Jesus's baptism. But with the destruction of Jerusalem, this feminine principle of Yahweh will disappear forever from Judaism. So Astarte, and actually Astarte or Asherah sometimes too, because you will see references in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. I forget which one it is, but they make references to not using Asherah poles, okay, which are again references to this, to the goddess and the fertility rites associated with her. So so Astarte is also another name for Ishtar. Again, she's supposed to be in the Canaanite view, sister and consort of Baal. And although Yahweh, I would not totally equate with Baal to some degree, he seems to be more like the god El, the Canaanite god El. And in fact, in other translations of the Old Testament, Yahweh is in fact referred to as El. So just a little history there of the Bible. But Astarte does play a role there and is considered to be another one of the versions of Ishtar with similar attributes. Okay, so Venus, I'm mentioning her here, Roman goddess nearly identical to the Greek Aphrodite. And as I mentioned, her name means grace. And she's the mother of the Roman people through her son Aeneas. That's the difference. When you read the Aeneid, you see a very different side of Venus to the one that you see in the stories of Aphrodite. And her main thing is she is a goddess of seduction, female charm. She has a lot to do with gardens, with beautiful things. But she is also more of a mother figure, which Aphrodite is not so much in the Greek, in Roman culture. Hathor, okay, Egyptian goddess of fertility, childbirth, and beauty. And she she tends to be associated with the cow, which is considered to be a very maternal kind of an animal. And she was one of the most worshipped deities in the Old Kingdom of Egypt. She is, she maybe have a relationship, Hathor has a relationship to Sekhmet. And Sekhmet is sort of the black form of the goddess with a lion head, who is associated with high noon, with drought, generally with the more negative aspects of the sun. Sometimes Sekhmet's called the Eye of Ra. And again, like the other love goddesses, she has this loving, nurturing aspect, dealing with fertility and sexuality, but also this very destructive one. So this is one of the things that you see. There's this, the love goddesses are not just all about sweetness and love. A lot of times they're also about war and about destruction as well. So interesting thing, as we're thinking about the concept of love, it's interesting that, war and those kinds of things are actually part of that equation, but the more deeply you think about it, that might not be so weird. Okay, Isis is another Egyptian goddess, very similar to Hera, in that she is the wife of Osiris, who at the one time was the king, although there's the whole episode of the death and the resurrection of her husband Osiris at the hands of the brother Set. And, and it's, so there's a similarity there to the Aphrodite and Adonis myth. Let me tell you quickly what the Aphrodite Adonis myth is. I think I mentioned it somewhere else, but it's the idea that, Aphrodite, there's another mythology. We're going to talk about it in the incest mythology, actually, because this woman, Mura, is made to fall in love with her father, who's the king. The nurse ends up helping her have sex with her father. Once the father finds out, he pursues her. She ends up being turned into a myrrh tree, but she's pregnant, and the child she gives birth to is this beautiful baby called Adonis. Aphrodite takes the baby and gives it to Persephone in the underworld for safekeeping. But the baby's so beautiful as he grows up that they're both fighting over who gets to keep him. So they let him decide, what he wants to do. So he agrees he's going to spend, he's going to have, I think it's something like 6 months in the upper world, 6 months in the lower world. Well, actually, I think it was like, it's divided up a little bit differently. It was like 6 months in one place, and then he could have, it was like 3 months with each of them, and then he could decide how he wanted to spend the other. And he preferred to spend the other time with Aphrodite in the upper world. But one day he was hunting, and he was hunting boar, and he ended up getting killed. And Aphrodite was so distraught, she took his blood and made it into the Adonis flower. So similar story. His case, he was hunting. In the case of Attis, he was killed by Cybele, who then regretted her action. Here, Osiris is killed by Set, his brother, and there's this whole rigmarole that Isis goes through, which is actually similar to the story of Demeter we're going to talk about in underworld mythology, to try to get her husband back and to piece him back together and bring him back to life, in which case, she manages to get the corpse of Anubis to impregnate her with the god Horus, who then later defeats Seth, in the sort of battle for kingship. So, but Isis, I have a podcast on Isis. She's generally considered to be a very sweet, maternal, and dedicated, but she has her dark elements as well. So she's it's a story worth looking into. Oh, okay. She's got the cow horns on her head in the other one. This one, she has a throne on her head. That's one of the ways you identify her in statue. And the idea of Isis on the throne, usually with a child being suckled, usually Horus at her chest, is the model for the figure of what they call the Madonna and child. The Madonna, for some people, I was surprised how many people didn't know what the Madonna was. They think of the singer Madonna. Madonna is actually the word for the Virgin Mary. So, so that's the model for that, is usually, the idea of the throne. Okay, Freya. Let's talk about Freya for a moment. Switch my pages here. Freya is the Norse goddess of love and fertility. Okay, and possibly it's a wife of Odin, I think, or she's connected with him. It's listed as Od. It says probably another form of Odin, and the daughter of Njord. She has shape-shifting attributes. Some of the stories associated with her, I'm just looking at what I have here. She's a goddess of love and fertility, most beautiful and propitious of the goddesses, patron goddess of crops and birth, symbol of sensuality and called upon in matters of love. She loves music, spring and flowers, and fond of the elves or fairies. Freya is one of the foremost goddesses of the Vanir. She is the daughter of the god Njord and the sister of Freyr. Later, she married the mysterious god Odin, probably Odin, who disappeared. When she mourned for her lost husband, her tears changed to gold. Her attributes are the necklace of the Breezings, which she obtained by sleeping with 4 dwarves, a cloak or skin of bird feathers, which allows its wearer to change into a falcon, and a chariot pulled by 2 cats. She owns Hildisvini, or a battle boar, who is actually her human lover Ottar in disguise. It's interesting that she has a man disguised as a pig, kind of reminds us of Circe or Kirke in the Greek. Her chambermaid is Fulla. Freya lives in the beautiful palace Volkfang, Field of Folk, where love songs are always played, and her hall is Sessrumnir. She divides the slain warriors with Odin. One half goes to her palace, while the other goes to Valhalla. Women also go to her hall. Okay, so Freya it seems to be very, very solidly the goddess of love, prosperity. She is a shapeshifter, which we see in a lot of these goddesses. So she can, so that gives her almost a trickster element, being able to change shapes. But she is, and very probably the wife of Odin. Her name is the word name. The day Friday actually comes from Freya, and she is. So she seems to be this embodiment of love and fertility. The idea of the love goddess is also dealing with fertility and agriculture in the field, which is not what you see in the Greek, though the Roman Venus does also have some of those associations. So, the fertility, whether it's strictly fertility of humans, or whether it's also the fertility of, the fields and the earth, and perhaps livestock and everything else, which makes her more of about a natural force of creation and fertility. And finally, Anya, goddess of summer, love, and fertility. There's 2 versions of her tale. I'm going to read a little bit for you. It says, Anya, an Irish goddess of summer, wealth, and sovereignty. Sovereignty is a big thing in Ireland. There's lots of them. It's not just Anya. There's the Morrigan, there's Maeve, there's these different deities that all associated with autonomy. Sovereignty means sort of ownership, usually self-ownership and self-rule. Okay, I have my own sovereignty, it could have to do with a kingdom or, one possessing one's kingdom, but it has a lot to do with that. So she's associated with midsummer and the sun, sometimes represented by a red mare. She's the daughter of Egobel, the sister of Ellen or Fennin, and is claimed as an ancestor by multiple Irish families. As the goddess of love and fertility, she has command over crops and animals, and also associated with agriculture. So you see very similar to the Nordic. Anya is strongly associated with County Limerick. The hill of Knockany, Knockanya, is named after her and was a site of rites in her honor involving fire and blessing the land, recorded as recently as 1879. Okay. She has, in one tales, Anya is the wife of, Geroid Jarla, I think. My Irish is terrible. Okay, in spite of my name, my Irish is terrible. Rather than having a consensual marriage, he rapes her, thought to be based on the story of Ailil Olum, and she exacts her revenge by changing him into a goose, killing him, or both. And in one of those stories, it said that she might, she doesn't kill, apparently there's another version as well where she makes him impotent. So I can tell you certainly that the Irish goddesses are not ones to be messed with, although we also see this with the Babylonian ones. So there is that element. In her case, it's less about war. I mean, there's definitely the whole sexual element, but there's also this sense of independence. I'm my own woman and you don't have the right to take my body. Whereas in other cultures, certainly that was necessary. That was, whether it was liked, looked upon favorably or not, it seemed to be common practice. So, all right, so let's talk about marriage archetypes. Getting closer here to the end. So I wanted to kind of highlight 2 different kinds of relationships we see in Greek mythology. The Zeus and Hera archetype of marriage, also Poseidon and Amphitrite, you see these. There's a tension here between two issues. There's the idea of enforced chastity, because when you're married, the idea is that you are monogamous. You're married because you don't have another partner. And also of desiring what is forbidden. So while you're within the marriage, it's like that trap of enforced chastity makes you, want to, gives you a roving eye elsewhere, because the wife no longer has the same level of interest that the lover had. And I'm going to talk about that archetypally in a moment. We have Zeus who's continually unfaithful, and Hera continually arguing with him and taking out her wrath for infidelity on the other woman. Now, it's quite possible that there was genuine love at some time between Zeus and Hera, but there seems to be a real absence of it in their relationship. Their relationship seems to be purely political, and purely, duty and obligation. And there seems to be an absence of romantic love. The only time we see it, as I mentioned before with the girdle of Venus, is in that book in the Iliad, which they call the Ate, or the deception, when she manages to take Zeus to bed and seduce him just so she can put him to sleep and disobey his orders. So it's, the sex with him is utilitarian. It's just, she's manipulating him so that she can get her ends. But it's not about being in love with him. So it's very interesting how they end up kind of being the archetype of what we think of. We on the one hand, we tend to view marriage, we've had this fairy tale image of marriage as happily ever after. But the reality of marriage is that it's actually a lot of hard work, and not necessarily always, if you're lucky, do you retain the romance in marriage? I mean, a lot of people do. But when you live in day-to-day life, that, especially if people have kids and stuff, it's just, it's not the same. Even if the two people do love each other, the love has to transform into something beyond that. But Zeus and Hera sort of take the extreme of kind of the arguing couple and the philandering husband. So now that is the idea of this deep spiritual love. I wanted to mention this on the other end of the spectrum. There's a story of a couple called Bacchus and Philemon. So this is actually in Ovid's Metamorphosis. Do you have that book? It's book 8 in the Penguin edition. That's on page 323. This is about, they're telling stories. The river gods just told a story about a transformation, because metamorphosis is about these kinds of transformation, like people into trees and rivers and stuff like that. So, but some people listen to the story that this river god just tells. They're all, wow, they're all rapt. But then Pirithous, the young tearaway, who had no use for the gods, pure fiction, he says, Achelous, you credit gods with too much power if you think they create and then alter shapes in nature. All were aghast at these blasphemous words and voiced disapproval, especially Lelex, whose mind reflected riper years. The power of heaven cannot be measured, he answered firmly. It knows no bounds. Whatever the gods decree is accomplished. To ease your impious doubts, you should visit the Phrygian hills to look at an oak and linden tree nearby, both ringed by a low wall. I've been to the place myself. When Pythias sent me from the Troezen to Phrygia's lands, where his father Pelops had once been king. Not far from the spot is a fen which used to be habitable land, but is now underwater and haunted merely by coots and divers. Jupiter once came here disguised as a mortal, and with him his son, the messenger Mercury, wands and wings set aside. Looking for shelter and rest, they called at 1,000 homesteads. 1,000 doors were bolted against them. One house, however, did make them welcome, a humble abode with a roof of straw and a marsh reed, one that knew its duty to gods and men. Here good Philemon and Bacchus had happily passed their youth. Here they had reached their old age, enduring their poverty lightly, by owning it freely and being content with the little that they had. If you came, it made no difference to ask for the masters or servants. The household consisted of 2, each giving and taking the orders. So when the gods found their way to this humble dwelling, the door was so low they could only cross the threshold by stooping. Philemon moved forward a bench and asked them to rest their limbs, while Bacchus bustled about to spread a rough covering over it, then crossed the hearth to brush the wood ash away from embers of yesterday's fire and bring it to life by feeding it leaves and dry tree bark, with only her feeble puffing for bellows. Then fetching some splits of kindling and pieces of dry branch, she broke them up and set them under her bronze pot. Next, she stripped the outer leaves of cabbage her husband had picked from the garden, while he, with the help of a fork stick, lifted a chine of bacon from the blackened beam and chopped a piece from the back they had carefully saved for so long, dropped it into the pot to cook in the boiling water. While they were waiting, they passed the time in agreeable talk, and hours went by in a flash. On a hook there was hanging a sturdy-handled bucket of beechwood, and this was filled with warm water so the guests could wash their limbs. A sedge-stuffed cushion was laid on top of a couch with a frame and legs of willow wood. It was covered with drapes which were only brought out on special occasions, still tawdry and worn if they didn't disgrace the couch. The gods reclined. With her skirts tucked up and the shaking hands, old Bacchus positioned a three-legged table behind them, but one of the legs was short and she had to level it with a potsherd. Once the table was steady, she wiped its surface with green mint and laid a spread of unsalted olives, green and black, endive and radish, a pickle of autumn cornel cherries, cream cheese and eggs, very lightly cooked on moderate ash heat, served in earthenware dishes. When that was finished, a molded wine bowl of similar silver was set on the table with goblets carved out of beech and coated with golden wax on the inside. After that, it did not take long for the hot main course to be brought from the hearth. The young wine next was returned to the table, but soon removed to clear for dessert. Okay, so we're going on the whole meal here. To crown this humble fare, the smiles on the old folks' faces betokened a wealth of unfailing kindness. Meanwhile, whenever the mixing bowl got empty, it seemed to refill itself of its own accord, with the wine welling up by itself. Stunned and scared by this wonder, Philemon, trembling, and Bacchus lifted their upturned hands to heaven and fervently prayed for forgiveness after serving so poorly prepared a repast. Then they set to placate their mysterious guests by killing the goose, their only one, which guarded the tiny farm. The bird kept fluttering around, exhausting the elderly couple, and long eluding their grasp till the last two appeared to have flown to the gods themselves for refuge. You must not kill it, they said. We are gods. Your neighbors shall pay the price they deserve for their wicked impiety. You alone shall be spared from the coming disaster. We simply ask you to leave your home and walk in our footsteps up the mountains. The couple obeyed, and using their sticks to support them, they wearily climbed the long, steep slope. They were just a bow shot away from the top when they turned and saw that the other houses were underwater, with only their own still standing. And while they gazed in amazement, lamenting the fate of their neighbors, their little old cottage, a small home even for two to inhabit, was changed to a temple. The fork-shaped props were replaced by columns, the thatch turned yellow, and now it appeared the roof was gilded. Doors engraved with reliefs, and the ground paved over with marble. At last, King Jupiter gently addressed them. You good old man, and you the wife that his goodness deserves, now name whatever boon you desire. Philemon conferred for a moment with Bacchus before advising the gods of their joint decision. We ask to be priests and to guard your temple, and since we have passed our years together in peace, let the same hour carry us off, so I need not look on my dear wife's grave, nor she have to bury my body. Their wish was granted, and as long as life was allowed them, they served as the temple's guardians. When the time had taken its final toll, and they were casually standing in front of the steps of the building, telling the sanctuary's history, both Philemon and Bacchus witnessed their partner sprouting leaves on their worn old limbs. As the tops of the trees spread over their faces, they spoke to each other once more while they could. Farewell, my beloved, they said in a single breath as the bark closed over their lips and concealed them forever. Still unto this day, the peasants of Phrygia point to the oak and the linden, which were once the forms of Philemon and Bacchus. Okay, so this is their wish. So what does this say about love here? Here's a couple that have always been together. They've never been greedy. They've never desired a lot. Okay, they've always their joy has been in being together and being with each other. And when they are confronted with the gods in their day-to-day tasks, which flusters them, the fact that they act so innocently and with such piety moves the gods themselves. And of course, the only thing that they wish for is to continually be together. So there's like a deep love that goes beyond the physical with these two. Okay. I mean, not that the physical probably wasn't important to them at some time, but it's gone well beyond that. And there's a love there that is deep and abiding and transcends death. Now, Jung was deeply, I think, moved by this story. And in fact, one of his, when he was writing his Red Book, when he was going through some of his own, he had a breakdown of his own, and he was kind of going through his own unconsciousness, confronting it. He had a guide called Philemon, named after that. And, one of the phrases that Jung used in connection with this story is on a great temple that he had on his property that he had built. And it says, vocatus atque non vocatus Deus aderit, which is what this says right here. And what that means in English is bidden or unbidden, God is present. And it's a reminder to us that even in our everyday life, the divine is present and you should not spurn it. Okay. However we look at that, whether you look at it as being in nature, whether you look at it in some other fashion, or if even it's just what you see in other people, because in some senses, that deep love comes from being able to look at other people and see the divine in them, in spite of whatever else whatever else, might not be perfect or great about them. Okay. Because nobody is perfect. By the way, perfect comes from perfectio, which means to end or be finished, which means you're dead. So nobody's perfect. But this is about that, seeing that in other people, seeing that thing in other people that, I'm going to use the phrase makes you want to serve them, even though love doesn't just have to be about serving someone else, but there's a desire to do for others. Okay. Okay. Quickly, there's like 3 types of women that are kind of, categories that you see among the Greek goddesses. If we want to talk about psychological prototypes here, Hera kind of tends to represent tradition, marriage, and family. She's less about emotion and sensuality, whereas Aphrodite is just the opposite there. She's sexual and she's intimate, although Aphrodite herself can be very cold when she wants to be as well. She may have some things in common with these other Near Eastern goddesses that we just talked about, who are, who may be loving and protecting, but their attributes. There's definitely a perception there of love as not being all sweetness and light. And then we have Athena and Artemis, who are the virginal goddesses, and they kind of represent the independent kind of quote unquote masculinized women. They're hunters. They deal with war. They are generally companions to other men in manly pursuits, but they're virgin. They're chaste. They don't, and any man that would try to ravish them, as we see in 2 cases with Artemis, meets a very, very unhappy end, usually being turned into animals and then hunted by their own crew or by their own family or something. So they are, these seem to be the kind of psychological female types in general that appear. Okay, so let's get to Carl Jung on love, and this is the end of it. Okay, so according to Jung, falling in love is an act of projection of the soul archetype. If you're a man, you are projecting, and again, right now we're just going to look at quote unquote heteronormative relationships. I'm going to talk a little bit about what this means for people who are not heteronormative. So if you're just saying man falls in love with woman, man projects the anima archetype onto the woman. Okay. Similarly, when a woman falls in love with a man, she is projecting her own animus archetype onto the man. However, the ways in which those translate are different. You may have 2 people who look at each other with an attraction, but what's happening with that soul image is different. And that's something that's really confused people when Jung talks about the anima, especially about the animus, because his thing about the animus, he says, well, the animus is opinionated and it's this, and it represents the worst part of womanhood and this and that. And you think, God, what a misogynist, he's just like, he's just trashing this female soul, which he doesn't even call a soul. But it's because the masculine element of the woman is very judgy. That's what it does. And we're going to watch a video in a minute to explain with a good explanation of how that works. But marriage should be at its best a means of balancing opposites and of individuation, which is, I mentioned, that process of bringing, both sides of your psyche together, the stronger and the weaker, the masculine and the feminine, what's in shadow with what's our strengths and light, bringing that together and synthesizing it into a whole person. Okay. I'm just going to read a little bit from Jung's Marriage as a Psychological Relationship, and I'll provide all these to you as handouts so you can see them yourself. I'm not going to read the whole thing. We're just going to get a couple of pieces here. Okay. He says, in the child, consciousness rises out of the depths of the unconscious psychic life, first like separate islands, which gradually unite to form a continent, continuous landmass of consciousness. Progressive mental development means, in effect, extension of consciousness. With the rise of continuous consciousness, and not before, psychological relationship becomes possible. So far as we know, consciousness is always ego consciousness. In order to be conscious of myself, I must be able to distinguish myself from others. Object relations theory would say that's the moment, which you recognize your separateness. That's where the identity comes from. Relationship can only take place where this distinction exists. But although distinction may be made in a general way, normally it's incomplete because large areas of psychic life still remain unconscious. As no distinction can be made with regard to unconscious contents, on this terrain, no relationship can be established. Here there reigns the original unconscious condition of the ego's primitive identity with others. In other words, a complete absence of relationship. So in Eros and Psyche, what's happening there when Psyche is completely unaware of Eros, there's not a real relationship there. So then they're talking about marriage now, and he says, when it comes to marriage, the greater area of unconsciousness, the less marriage is a matter of free choice, as is shown subjectively. Ooh, say that 10 times fast. In the fatal compulsion one feels so acutely when one's in love. The compulsion can exist even when one is not in love, even though it's in a less agreeable form. The relationship of the young man to his mother and of the girl to her father is a determining factor in this respect. The strength of the bond to the parents that unconsciously influences the choice of husband or wife positively or negatively. Children are driven unconsciously in direction intended to compensate for things left unfulfilled in the lives of their parents. That is, excessively moral-minded parents may have what are called unmoral children, or an irresponsible wastrel of a father has a son with a positively morbid amount of ambition. A mother who deliberately keeps herself unconscious as to not to disturb the pretense of a satisfactory marriage unconsciously binds the son to her as a substitute for her husband. So he talks about these different kinds of things. But the idea here is that, okay, he talks about the childish gestures of all lovers. Even more is it a return to the mother's womb, the teeming depths of a yet unconscious creativity. It is in truth a genuine and incontestable experience of divine, whose transcendent force obliterates and consumes everything individual, a real communion with life and the impersonal power of fate. The individual will for self-possession is broken. The woman becomes the mother, the man the father, and both are robbed of their freedom and made instruments of the life urge. And he says, seldom or never does a marriage develop into an individual relationship smoothly and without crises. There's no birth of consciousness without pain. Okay, and that also goes back to Eros and Psyche, right? There's no birth of consciousness without pain. Now, I just want to simplify without reading a lot of Jung's jargon here. I wanted to give you kind of the basis, his background and basis when he's talking about anima and animus. The main thing to think about here, when you are dating someone, and what I've often said is that whether or not somebody who is non-binary or transgender, if they're the best way to determine whether or not you are dominantly functioning with an anima or animus, I tend to think most people have both, only again, like everything else, one dominates. If your image, if the soul image that you project, if you are primarily attracted to women, then your soul image is probably that of an anima, primarily. If you're primarily attracted to men, that's probably the animus. If you're, indiscriminately attracted to both sexes, probably there are elements of both that are in play. Okay, but strictly speaking, usually like anything, like you're right-handed or left-handed. Some people are ambidextrous and can do both, but there's a sense of one that tends to dominate over the other. So whatever your personal identity is, whatever you project that out to and are attracted to probably represents your soul image. So that might be the easiest way to think about it. Probably not a perfect way, but the easiest way. Okay, so when you project this image out, let's we'll just do heteronormative just for argument's sake, okay? So a woman and a man. A woman falls in love with a man. What's happening there, and maybe perhaps vice versa, okay? He's projecting the anima onto her, she's projecting the animus onto him. While they're dating, they may have a great relationship. They may be romantic, may be a lot of sex. There may be like, oh, I'm in love with you, love song, romance, whatever. They have all of that. Then let's just say at some point they decide they want to get married, okay? And then, the ring goes on the finger, and they say their vows, they go on their honeymoon, get married, all that good stuff. Then what happens? Everything changes. I'm going to give you an example from a real life relationship that I know. I knew a woman. There's a woman who used to be a waitress at a restaurant I used to frequent, and I remember her telling me the story of her daughter. Her daughter, I don't remember the daughter's name particularly. I remember the boyfriend's name was Charlie. They had lived together for 15 years. Okay, she owned a house, they lived in it for 15 years together. Okay. And finally, one day they just decided, you know what, we really should, we should make it official. We should get married. So they do. They go down, they have marriage ceremony and everything. The next morning, Charlie comes down to the kitchen table and says, well, now you're my wife. So this is what I expect. Breakfast had better be on the table by 8 o'clock. I want my shirts ironed this way. He starts going on this whole list of all the things that now are expected of her as his wife. And she looked at him and, bless her, she took all of his stuff, threw it outside and said, get the F out of my house. She divorced him within the month. And eventually, apparently, she did meet somebody nice and get remarried. But oh boy, what happened there? I was married for almost 10 years. Yeah, very similar thing happened. My husband was madly in love with me. And then as soon as we get married, it becomes like, yep, you're there to have sex with me when I want you to. Otherwise, you're there to cook, clean, and otherwise piss off so I can spend time with my friends. Now you're mama. Your mama. Okay. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to happen all the time. It depends a lot of variables on how the relationship develops, but it's a relationship that's strictly archetypal in a lot of ways. Okay. Even people who you think you know may unconsciously gravitate to the archetype. And if their expectation of marriage is that you're mama now, if you're the woman, that gets to be a problem. Because now it's like, and sometimes women will fall very naturally into that role or feel that that is what their role is supposed to be. But that's when you get into conflicts. You have men who don't want children. You have women who don't want children too. But if when that sort of normal unconscious script that the archetype plays, the anima is kind of the dangerous, sexy one. The mother is like, well, that's mother. Mama's supposed to like have the children, keep the house. And if you have kind of still a teenage mindset, then mother, we don't want to be bothered with that. So you're just there to take care of stuff for me. And otherwise, and then a lot of times these same men, because you're no longer anima, the projection of anima is withdrawn, you're not as interesting. They go and project anima somewhere else. This can happen the other way around too. But that's what we talk about with the projection. That's why it's the most obvious, because when you fall in love with somebody, you behave in ways that you would never rationally do. You give things up that you would never give up for anybody else. The archetype drives you. And it's not until that projection is withdrawn from that person, when that person is no longer this little archetype deity to you, that you're able, and a lot of times that'll happen. People will go out, they'll be like, oh, and then they break up 6 weeks later and they're like, what the hell did I see in that person? The archetype, it's the projection, and you have no control over the projection. You have to let it run its course. And sometimes that does mean suffering, because it may mean, if it's a relationship that your rational mind tells you is no good for you, you may have to try to put the brakes on, and that's an extremely, extremely hard and painful thing. You may stop the behavior, you may stop going out with the person, but you won't be able to let go of the feeling until it's ready to let go of you. Okay. I want to show you, I'm going to stop the share of this, and I want to open, let's see, let me find, yeah. I'm going to share this video, okay. This is about the animus and anima in Jungian psychology. It's a 7-minute video. It's very short, but this definitely makes the point. I mean, we're hearing from different Jungian analysts here, but John Beebe's is the most interesting. So take a look at this.
That for every woman, there was a masculine aspect within her psyche, the archetype of the animus, and for every man, a feminine counterpart, the anima.
The anima is an archetypal form expressing the fact that a man has a minority of feminine or female genes, yeah, and that is something that doesn't disappear in him. That is constantly present, and it works as a female in a man. The same is the case with the animus. That is a masculine image in a woman's mind, which is not sometimes quite conscious, sometimes it is not conscious, but it is called into life the moment that woman meets a man who says the right things. And then because he said it is all true, and he is the fellow. No matter what he is.
And the whole point is that the female ego has to be in charge of the animus. Now, that's not a generally accepted idea, because the old hangover of you lean on men and men will somehow make your life interesting or something, and you just lose all your own ideas or innovations or creativity. And I think a lot of women are scared out of being who they are and doing whatever is important to them still.
The animus to me is one of the most significant concepts that has arisen in Jungian psychology. It speaks of the function that connects a woman with her deepest self and personhood, her creativity, the unformed that's forming as she ages, her work, her word, her ideas, herself, her person.
In the Alfred Hitchcock film Notorious, John Beebe finds a drama of the animus in the conflict between a woman and men.
Just a minute, Miss Huberman. Hold it, Miss Huberman, would you please? We'd like a statement from you, Miss Huberman, about your father. For instance, do you think your father got what he deserved?
Could we say that you're pleased your father is going to pay the penalty for being a German worker?
Now notice the way the woman is badgered by a series of men. All the people holding cameras are men, and all the people who speak to her are men. And so you immediately get the image of a woman in a vulnerable position, badgered by a group or a series of men. Now there's the perfect image of what Jung means by the animus. The way the animus attacks the woman and the way it's often symbolized by a multiple figure or a crowd, and the way it moves in on the woman and judges her. The cameras are all in the lower left hand of the screen. And then gradually we realize that in the lower left hand, there is now one man whose viewpoint we have, and he's a dark, kind of unknown figure. She's half attracted to him, half suspicious of him, wonders, is he a policeman? This is the experience of so many women of constantly being under an attack. Do I look okay? Is my reputation okay? The camera turns, and finally he becomes a personality in his own right. Indeed, he's Cary Grant.
There's one more trick left to please. Shame about the eyes.
So the very critic, the very thing that's most attacking the woman, is also somehow the thing that's most erotically exciting and the most interesting and the most energetic. And there, in a little nutshell, you get the problem of the animus.
Now, see, the archetype is a force, it has an autonomy. It can suddenly seize you. It is like a seizure. So, for instance, falling in love at first sight, that is such a case. You see, you have a certain image in yourself without knowing it of the woman, of the woman. Yeah. Now you see that girl, or at least a good imitation of your type, and instantly you get a seizure, and you're gone. Yeah. And afterwards, you may discover that it was a hell of a mistake.
The concepts of animus and anima emerged as Jung observed the lives and psychological realities of his patients, and they help in understanding both the pain and the delights of human relationship. Robert Johnson.
Man insists upon making some outer figure, generally a flesh and blood woman, bear his anima for him. That is, he mediates the outer world by way of his anima instead of using her inside where she belongs. This produces more suffering and more upset and more pain than any other single thing that I know about.
Oh, you see, a man is quite capable, he's intelligent enough to see that that woman of his choice, as one says, not no choice, he has been captured. You know, he sees that she's no good at all, that she's a hell of a business. And he tells me so, and he says, for God's sake, doctor, help me to get rid of that woman. He can't. He's like clay in a finger. And that is the archetype. That is so for the archetype of the anima.
This contribution of Jung's animus and anima theory is not only of immense use in understanding relationship difficulties and the joys and richnesses of relationships, but is actually something, as with all the best ideas, that people, ordinary people, are doing anyway. That's a real acid test of all psychological theory. If it really turns out to be a description of what's happening, it's good theory.
Okay, so sorry, I don't know if I have my mic plugged back in. Hopefully that sound all translated. So there you are, anima and animus. Anima becomes projected onto a woman, becomes that image of the object of desire. Same things happen with the animus. In the case of the woman, though, the animus tends to act as a as like a group of men that move in and judge. So now she feels like no matter what she does, like, is what I'm doing good enough? Is he going to like it? Is it, you know, how do I look? How's this? You know, that it's something. It's not that men may not go through something like this in some degree, but it is different. And I've also seen gay men go through this. I've seen, you know, it's like I said, it's a matter of what what you're normally attracted to sexually. That's going to, we see how this is going to manifest. But and you also see it manifest in people who are artists and writers, people who always think everything they do is not good enough, that, you know, I'm, you know, being super critical. It's almost an animus factor. There's that constant sense of judgment as to what you're doing and whether or not it's good enough. But a lot of times we will feel that in relationships. We almost turn, that's what I said, the archetype in that sense is like a god, because we turn the other person that we've projected it onto into this type of god, because the animus and anima figures don't represent things that are really actually attainable by humans or even reasonable to expect humans to attain. So you have to learn to separate the archetype from the person. A person is not the archetype. You may see qualities in there from your own unconscious psyche that attracts you. But you have to remember, real love comes when you realize that the person's not the archetype and you still love them anyway. That's it for this class. We will see you in the next one.